Drew DeArmond joins me. He's a good friend. He is at ESPN Radio 97.7 The Zone in Huntsville, Alabama. He's on a good bit of that state. He's been on our show multiple times before. We're going to do a little round the horn today, talk some football, baseball, basketball. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Chris, man, it's always great to be with you. Glad to be with you on Southeastern 14 here. I know it's growing every day. I mean, you guys are, churning out the content, and your subscribers are going up, and congrats on the success. And as you told me on the show the last time, and I guess I should have been ready for that, soon it will be Southeastern 16.
Right. That's the plan. We'll flip the switch at some point. But Alabama, I guess, needs to flip a switch in terms of getting the football program back where it was. Not that it's bad, but I think 2 years in a row without a national title, panic alarms set off in that state. But let's be real. Alabama lost 2 games by 1 play each time last year. But what's interesting, Drew, you're seeing changes at coordinators. Maybe you're seeing some changes in philosophy. Georgia's been the bully on the block the last couple of years. How has that affected what Alabama is or isn't going to do?
Well, I think Coach Saban may go back to the future, to quote a 1985 movie that was a smash. I think it's partly it's because of the quarterback room. I think they haven't decided who the QB1 is going to be, and I think they understand that they want to make things easier on the quarterback. They had to last year, the last third of the year season for Bryce Young, because as much of a magician as he was, everybody knows he got hurt, and the receiving core wasn't as good as it had been, and so they had to take pressure off of Bryce, and they needed to run the football, and I think they became more patient. I think the formula of 30, 35 runs a game they came up with worked. It all started in the second half of the Ole Miss game when, as you remember, they were in trouble severely in that game, but came back and won it. And really, I think it was a turning point for Alabama's season, because even though they didn't make the playoff, they finished 11-2, and Ole Miss went into a tailspin and did not finish strong. Because remember, Ole Miss was at one time 7-0. They were thinking about, Atlanta. They were thinking about maybe being a playoff contender, and it just really took the wind out of their sails. So I think, I wasn't as down on Bill O'Brien as a lot of the fan base was. I mean, when you average 40 points a game, you should be winning. To me, I know they didn't run the football as well as they wanted, but some of that was a part of the offensive line not being where they wanted it to be. And I think some of it was inexperience at wide receiver. But I think overall, it's about how many points you score. And so I think defensively is where they kind of lost their edge. And so I think physicality on both lines of scrimmage is what Nick Saban's been trying to fix, is the biggest thing. And it's kind of apropos of the term you use, bully on the block. Well, Georgia's been a bully. Alabama didn't play them last year, but certainly split with them the year before. And so I do think Georgia was better last year. So Nick Saban knows his program better than anyone, and I think what he wants to do is get back to being a bully on the offensive and defensive lines. And I think a change in leadership at defensive coordinator was needed. You need to go from good to great. And I can't say Pete Golding was awful. I've criticized him, but Alabama was still 11-2. Alabama played for the national championship the year before. But I don't think he was elite. And to me, if you're going to win a national championship in college football, you have to be elite or at least very close to it. And Alabama wasn't that defensively. And he went back to the future with Kevin Steele. Steele's been with him 3 times. But I go back to this. I know he didn't do as good a job with Alabama back 15 years ago, 16 years ago. And he had a rough go at Clemson. But I go on body of work as a whole. When I watched him, he knows the SEC. He did not have a good run last year at Miami, but that wasn't his fault. I think it was head coach and roster. And I think, when he was at Auburn, he did an outstanding job in 5 years and didn't have the kind of talent Alabama does. But I think he maximized it. And I think he's going to do a good job for the next 2 to 3 years at Alabama, because he knows what Saban wants, and he's going to coach the coaches. I find it very interesting the way Saban set up his staff this year, that Kevin Steele is not going to be a position coach. He has an extensive history at linebacker, especially inside. But they hired Robert Balla from Liberty to come in and work with those guys. He's getting high marks. And I think a lot of what Coach Steele is going to do is coach the coaches. In other words, okay, we're going to get XYZ production out of this group, or I'm going to put a boot in your ass. It's just to say it on your show. So that's what he's going to do. He's not afraid also to swap paint with Saban, so to speak. In other words, I was always told that maybe, Pete Golding and Saban, Kirby and Saban and Kirby and Jeremy Pruitt and Saban, there was always some give and take, and they always knew what buttons to push, and they held their own quarter. In other words, Saban is a guy that'll confront you. Well, if you have the answers and you stand up for what you believe in, you gain his respect, and then he says, well, it better work, so to speak. Well, I don't know that Pete Golding did that a lot. And plus, quite frankly, Coach Saban brought up Pruitt and Kirby in the system, so they knew how to apply it. It was a thing where I think Pete Golding, he taught something completely different at UT San Antonio. When he came to Alabama, he had to learn Saban's system. I don't know that he ever learned how to apply it as well. And Kevin Steele knows how to do it, even though he ran something different at Auburn, but he's been at Alabama twice. And I'll just say this. I don't overreact to spring games, but I was able to see a scrimmage. I was able to see the 8A game, and I saw much better fundamentals and tackling and physicality. And I think that's what Alabama, and I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get back to physicality on both lines of scrimmage, run the ball more efficiently, especially in the red zone, and stop the run, because I think everybody always focuses on Jalen Hyatt and 200 yards and 5 touchdown passes against Alabama for Tennessee. But the biggest reason they lost to the Vols and LSU is they gave up 180 yards rushing in both games. You've got to stop the run. They've got to be holding people to 100 yards. And they did a good job against Bijan Robinson, who was the best running back in the draft, in the NFL draft last year, held him to 57 yards. But they did not do a very good job in the 2 games they lost, and so it was inconsistent. And so to me, they've got to get better up front on both lines of scrimmage at running the ball and stopping the run. And then if they do, that will help the pass rush, it will help the secondary, and they'll be a better football team.
Yeah, you hit on directly or indirectly 3 things that kind of stand out to me about Alabama and what's been different. Look, I mean, and again, this was a team that could have easily won the whole thing last year with the breaks. It's not like things have just fallen off a cliff, but it has looked differently times. The 3 things that stand out to me are, and we'll get to the running back room in a minute because it's supposed to be very talented. But when I think of vintage Nick Saban teams, I'm thinking of a few things. I'm thinking of, you got 2, maybe 3 future NFL starting tailbacks on your roster. And last year they had Jahmyr Gibbs, who was good, but he was more of what we used to call a third down back, a pass catcher. He's not a 235-pound run-you-over guy like Alabama's had a few of that won the Heisman. Number 2, I think where you can go tackle to tackle or end to end on the defensive line, and they're all guys that are going to be future first-round picks. Maybe a guy slips down to a second. It's not been the same name brand defensive line they've had. And the third thing you mentioned, Drew, was discipline. They got penalized somewhere in the neighborhood of 65, 70 yards a game last year. You know how crazy Nick Saban is about being disciplined. I'm just very interested to see. You started this with Back to the Future. I'll go turn back the clock. Can they go turn back the clock? And it's different now. But the other thing that you had to happen too, Drew, is the clock management rules. You're not going to be able to run 75 plays in a game like some teams did. I'm just wondering how this all fits together in the, I don't know if you call it a rebrand or not, but whatever you're going to call this, how that all works together.
Well, I think one, it's who he hired as OC, Tommy Rees, who did a nice job running the football at Notre Dame. In his system, and of course it's still Nick Saban's offense, but he always lets you put your stamp on it. It wasn't QB dependent. The QB did his job, distributed the football, but it was mainly not turn it over, which is Nick Saban's kind of football. Now he knew what kind of talent he had in Bryce Young, and he may have another one coming next year in Julian Sayin. But again, they're still going to allow the QB to throw the football. The one misnomer about Nick Saban is he's always been in favor of balance. He's always been in favor of attacking and throwing the ball. He doesn't want you to throw it to the other team. That's what drives him bananas. But I think the biggest thing, though, is Alabama, and you kind of mentioned the tailback room. I think he understands the way this team is going to be constituted. Once again, the receivers are still developing, but the strengths of the team are going to be the offensive line, because I think he really likes his offensive line coach, Eric Wolford, who will be in his second year since coming from Kentucky. I think he likes the young offensive line class they brought in, plus the guys they return, especially a guy like Tyler Booker, who is already showing a lot of leadership qualities. And him and J.C. Latham, I think, are going to lead that group. J.C. will be the right tackle, and Booker will likely be the right guard. That'll be your right side of your offensive line. And I think, what he wants to do is he wants to dictate the tempo to the other team. He wants to, bloody your nose. And, again, you mentioned the clock rules. He wants to control the clock a little bit more, still wants to attack, but I think he wants to make the game easier on the quarterback because he doesn't have a Bryce Young. They're still talented. But I think, certainly, and as you know, we it's kind of amazing we're in the conversation, hadn't really talked about the quarterback position a lot, but the QB position is going to be the biggest question going in. And it was truly a surprise. I certainly didn't see it coming. That they went out and got Tyler Buckner so quickly after the A-Day game. I mean, within a week he was there. But there's a relationship there with Tommy Rees. He understands his offense. And if you go back a couple years ago before Brian Kelly left for LSU, Brian Kelly thought Tyler Buckner, and along with Coach Rees, was the future at the quarterback position. But he got hurt last year, and then when he came back – and before that, he kind of struggled with turnovers. And when he came back in the Gator Bowl, he was MVP, but he still had 2 pick sixes. So again, he's our developing guy. And I get asked this all the time, like, who do you expect the quarterback to be? Well, with Jalen Milroe, I've just never been sold on him as a quarterback. Supreme athlete, the best athlete Saban's ever had at the quarterback position, better athlete than Jalen Hurts. But I don't think he wants to move positions to be a Cordell Stewart type slash guy, and I think would be to his benefit, but I don't think he wants to. And he's just never shown in 3 years that I've watched him a propensity to be able to throw it consistently. And so I think they brought in Tyler Buckner for a reason. It's kind of like, last year with LSU and Jaden Daniels coming in, they brought him in for a reason. And it'll either be Tyler Buckner or Ty Simpson. I still like Ty Simpson's future a lot, but I think they like Buckner, and if he can come in and learn things quickly and not turn it over, it wouldn't surprise me that if he's in the lineup. And the thing with all three of them, I've already mentioned the athleticism of Jalen Milroe, but all three of them are athletic. And so Coach Reeves will probably add some quarterback run to the situation. I think he'll feature the tight end a little bit more, and I think the tight end room is got a chance to be pretty good. And so I just think overall – and I think this will also play off the defense. I think it'll help the defense. They're going to get tougher. They're going to be better against the run. And I just think with Coach Steele, I think they're going to be better fundamentally. And I think Alabama's going to get back to kind of the standard that Alabama's had defensively, where under Kirby and Coach Pruitt, pretty much in every category, they were in the top 10 in the country. And that's why they were able to win. And so when you factor that in with having – I think the best place kicker in the country back in Will Reichert, and you got James Burnup, who has shown improvement every year at punter. It's going to be old school football, but I wouldn't be surprised. Alabama's still going to throw the football and throw it down the field, but this is going to be a team, to me, that'll be in the top 3 in the SEC in rushing and in time of possession. And if their turnover margin is really good, and if they're in the top 2 to 3 in the SEC there, then they're going to be back in Atlanta and back in the college football playoff, regardless of what happens in the SEC championship game. I guess that's a bold statement, but to be honest with you, for me, it's reached a point of the way college football is constructed right now, Chris. If you just get to Atlanta, and especially if you're undefeated or if you have one loss and you win it, but especially if you're undefeated and say it's a battle of unbeatens and you lose the game, you're still going to the playoff. So to me, Alabama's got an 80% chance to get to the playoff or better if they get to Atlanta. And I think this team can do that because I think most of, if not all their big games, when you look at their schedule, are in Tuscaloosa.
Okay, the running back room is highly regarded. This is a little bit of an unfair question, but I just want to see what you think here. You think back to Saban's best teams, again, you think of a Derrick Henry, a Mark Ingram, somebody like that. Is there a dude that caliber in that room?
Yes, Justice Haynes. I know he's just a freshman. He got my MVP vote for A-Day. He didn't get it, obviously. But he scored 3 touchdowns. He had 2 rushing and 1 receiving. He reminds me of Mark Ingram in the fact of how advanced mentally he is for a young player, and that means blocking, receiving, rushing. He can pretty much do all of it already. And it helps because Mark's dad, Mark Ingram, the senior, was an NFL player. Certainly Veron Haynes, Justice Haynes' father, played in the NFL, played at Georgia. Played the running back and fullback position. So he's a very smart kid. But I know right now I don't think he'll start the first game. That'll certainly be Jace McClellan. Roydale Williams will play a role, Jam Miller, and they've got Richard Young, who just got there in June. But I'm just telling you, if you ask me the most talented guy that I saw at the position in the spring, and it's Justice Haynes. And he got there for bowl practice before they played the Sugar Bowl, and pretty much from the first practice. I mean, he just stuck out. He stood out like a sore thumb. It was a great recruiting job by Coach Saban, because when I found out who his father was last year during the recruiting process, because the way I approach recruiting is this: I take it year to year. I try not to really focus, like when the 24 class is being put together, I'll just cursorily look at the 25s, but I don't really study them extensively. I'm studying, okay, who is Alabama going to sign in the 24 class? So it became obvious last year early they were going to sign at least 2 running backs, and that Justice Haynes was one of them. So I started studying him. Buford High School, it just transferred over there. You find out who his dad is, and I'm not going to lie, first thing I thought was, how is he not a dog? Because they're the national champs. His dad's a legend, hobnail boot, everything. But that just shows you how good a recruiter Nick Saban is, how good the staff is. And certainly they've stepped up their NIL game. But it's kind of funny. I think just like Kirby has mirrored Coach Saban and everything, I think both of them play the NIL game, but they don't play it like Tennessee and some of these other schools that are in desperation mode. I think they also feel like their program sells itself. But I think Justice Haynes has a chance to really have a big time impact at the running back spot as a freshman.
Yeah, the first thing I thought too was I can't believe his dad's got a kid playing college football. Doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but here we are.
I'll blow your mind again. And this is only because he's a member of the 24 recruiting class. I was looking at the state rankings in Alabama, and I knew he had a son, and I'd been watching him, but I didn't realize he was already a senior at Gadsden City High School, but Dre Kirkpatrick Jr. And so so he's already got a kid that will be signed this year. Now, will he be at Alabama? I don't know. He hasn't been offered yet. Auburn has offered him. Arkansas. He's Georgia Tech. He's definitely going to play Power 5 football. I just don't know yet if it's going to be at Alabama. But that just goes to show you, man, the years fly by. And Dre finished in 2011. He left a year early. And I remember I watched him in high school at Gadsden City himself. And, he had a long pro career, had a really good pro career over 10 years. And so, but it's hard to believe. It just goes to show you, though, how quick the years go by and how, kids can just grow so quickly. And so, yeah, I mean, you see Justice Haynes, and now you see Dre Kirkpatrick Jr. It's crazy.
Let's switch to the other side of the football. I talked about defensive line. It just seemed like Alabama was churning out one first rounder after another. It seemed like they made a switch to go a little bit lighter to try to cover guys in space and all the things you've got to do now. On the other hand, Georgia just kind of stuck with the thumpers and size, and that's won out so far. We're going back to that part where Alabama plays defense the way it used to a little bit more, aren't we?
Well, I think that's the plan. Now, they need to develop more depth on the D-line and at inside backer. Deontay Lawson will be their best inside backer, Chris, and he didn't practice in the spring. He was injured. He played well in the Sugar Bowl. He's from Mobile Christian. They're expecting good things out of him. There's another guy that I think they believe is ready to roll, Jihad Campbell. who played a little bit of special teams a year ago. Is a 5-star. They flipped from Clemson late in the process, from IMG Academy a couple years ago. I think they believe Jihad can be really good. And they signed a JUCO named Justin Jefferson. He's not very tall. He's only about 5'10", but he can really run. I think they're hoping he can provide quality depth at the position. And so we'll see. They brought in Trez Marshall from Georgia, who was a bit player for Georgia, a good one, but situational guy. But I think they're hoping that he can provide some leadership and depth, but they want to see more out of him in fall camp. And then the D-line, Tim Smith has finally got to become that war daddy, the Fedarian Mathis, the Quinnen Williams. He hasn't quite put it all together for them yet, so that's going to be interesting to see, what he does. And they got Justin Aboigbe back. He had a neck injury last year, Chris. They lost him early in the year, first top third of the season. That was kind of underrated. He was playing his best football before he got hurt. And there was even some thought he might be done, but he had a medical procedure that got him back. And so they're going to have him back. He'll be a senior. They need leadership and production from him. And so I think overall, when you look at it, and then they got two good outside linebackers back, but Dallas Turner was not who we saw as a freshman a year ago. Will Anderson's productivity dipped a little bit, and so did his. My two biggest questions on this football team as a whole is on the defensive side, and that's Freddie Roach at defensive line coach. Can he get more out of the group? And then can Coleman Hutzler, who came over from Ole Miss last year, can he get more? He recruited well. I mean, he got Keon Keeley, who will probably make an impact as a freshman as an edge rusher. But can they get more production out of Dallas Turner, who I believe has first-round talent, and then Chris Braswell, who's been a guy behind a couple Dallas and Will, who's been a situational player. Can he be an every down guy? And so that's what I'm wondering. And can they get more production and consistency out of that group? But I will say this: the thing that I'm most encouraged defensively by is that Kevin Steele is going with the formula that Jeremy Pruitt used, which is simplifying the calls and simplifying the defense, because Saban's defense is complicated. I mean, it's an NFL scheme, but, a lot of their problem, I think, was it wasn't simplified under Golding. They went back to kind of how Kirby used to do it. And Kirby, but see, here's the thing. Kirby is better than Pete Golding. Kirby knew how to teach it very well. And then when Jeremy took over for Kirby, he simplified it because he thought it let the players play faster, and it was easier for him to teach that way. Steele is of the same cloth, cut from the same cloth as Jeremy Pruitt. He wants to simplify it. He believes, after studying what Alabama was doing the last couple of years, that miscommunication on all three levels led to a lot of the big plays, people being out of the wrong gap, people lining up wrong in the secondary. And he feels like all three levels need to communicate better, and the best way to do that is to simplify things defensively. And if Alabama does that, they're certainly going to be young in the secondary because they lost a lot of vets to the NFL. But I will be honest with you, I think they're going to be more talented than the guys that left that were really good players. But I think they've recruited well back there. And with Travarius Robinson's experience and him taking over the secondary as a whole, I think Alabama can be better in the secondary if the defense is truly simplified.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a stat, and I know there are stats and there are stats that are lies, to paraphrase something. But this was I don't know that Alabama fans probably even know this. If you adjust for sacks being pass plays, make those pass plays and not running plays, they get counted as rushing yards lost when they're really not. Alabama gave up 4.7 yards a pass play a year ago. I mean, all the talk about the defense dropping and everything, and I think where it was when it really mattered, right? It was those games they lost where they got hurt. Now, per rush play, 4.1 yards given up. That's probably not quite the Alabama standard there, but that per pass play to me was amazing because you don't really think about Alabama maybe being elite in terms of pass defense. I don't know that's not fair. I think that's just a reflection of what we're used to. Now, the other thing that hurt them a year ago, they only forced turnovers on 1.5% of snaps, which is pretty low.
They didn't force enough.
And that's the thing when in close games like they lost two that went down to the last play, you throw one more of those in there somewhere, and we're probably having a different conversation about last season, Drew.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, and if you're more confident in what you're doing and you're more assignment sound, Chris, it cuts down on the penalties. And we know, starting with that Texas game, they got way too many penalties. Will Anderson got a lot of them, but all three levels of the defense, got penalized too much. But you're more confident in what you're doing, which probably leads to less penalties, and it's more disruption and chance for turnovers when you're not shooting yourself in the foot. So I think it's like a domino effect. And so I think if they can get more confident in what they're doing defensively, and they can get these, especially the young guys in the secondary, confident in what they're doing and their assignment sound, and they tackle well and they're physical, I think this defense can definitely be better. No question about it. And I think it's the biggest key, because besides the quarterback position. But I will say this, it's always easier to be a good quarterback if you have a good supporting cast. I do think this quarterback will have a good supporting cast. I do think the receiving core will be improved. Malik Newman from the junior college ranks is going to make a big impact, in my opinion, at wide receiver. He didn't have a huge A-Day, but again, there's nothing more, especially offensively, more fool's gold than A-Day. Okay, so they're not really
that's
showing
true of all spring games.
Yeah, they're not going to show you a lot, especially offensively. So I think, and then I think Ja'Cory Brooks is a guy they trust that I think can have a big senior year. He's not a big vertical play guy, but he's somebody that's on 3rd and 5, 3rd and 8 that you can count on to make plays in the clutch. Isaiah Bond, he had a bad A-Day, but other than that, he had a good spring. He's got a lot of speed. So I think they're going to have some receivers that will be able to make plays. And I just think overall they've got the weapons around the quarterback to be good. They just need to be sound defensively, as you just said. They need to force more turnovers, have a better pass rush, be disruptive. But I think they can be, and I think they're going to win the SEC West. Now, when we go to Nashville in a few weeks in your backyard, I'm going to pick Alabama to win the West over LSU. I did last year. I was one of the few that believed in LSU. Most did not. Most thought they were going to be 7-5, 6-6. I thought coaching mattered, and I believe that with Auburn too, because now I think Auburn's polarizing because they changed over half their roster, and so I don't really know how all the pieces are going to fit together. But it will not surprise me if Hugh Freeze goes 8-4 or 9-3. I think they're going to be a lot better than they were and a lot tougher to deal with, just simply because of much better stable coaching situation, someone that knows how to win. And I think Kevin Steele knows how to win on defense, and that's why I think Alabama's going to be better defensively, and I think they're going to get back atop the SEC West and beat a good LSU team in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I'm going to take you on a little sidebar before we switch sports with Alabama here. The West, to me, my goodness, I think it is as confusing to figure out as we sit here and do it at the end of June as I ever remember, because I think that I've made my picks, and just about every team I go, boy, I don't know that I'm comfortable with where I put them, but you had to put everyone somewhere.
Well, here's what I've said on my show on Talking Ball in 97.7 The Zone. I am confident in Alabama and LSU, and I'm confident in Georgia. And I'm pretty confident in Tennessee, even though they're not going to sneak up on anybody. And I'm not completely sold on Joe Milton, but I think they have pretty good talent. But after that, I couldn't tell you right now, in my opinion, who's going to finish third. I'm not confident enough in the East or the West. I think it's wide open. I think in the East, I would probably lean to Kentucky if they get good quarterback play. But I'm also not completely giving up on Florida, though I know they don't have a great roster. And I just don't believe in Spencer Rattler. So I can't force myself to say South Carolina's ready to jump all the way up to third. I'm just like, I'm not ready to do that. It'll be interesting, but I just don't – I'm not sold on anyone yet as far as who's going to be third in the East. And then in the West, I think – it's as competitive after Alabama and LSU as it's ever been. I think it's basically you could pick any of them. I think Auburn's ceiling would be third in the if everything went absolutely fine, like they wanted it to. They could go 9-3 and finish third, or they could go 4th or 5th. Lane Kiffin could have a really good team. I think I don't really know what to make of Mississippi State because I haven't seen their offense, because I just don't know what Zach Barnett and them are going to do. with their offensively, even though they have a quarterback coming back. And then, at Texas A&M, they have talent, but, how am I supposed to believe in Jimbo Fisher and Bobby Petrino and that's going to work? So, yeah. I mean, I'm not ready to say that either. And then Arkansas with their schedule's easier this year. And so they do have they're one of the rare teams that has a quarterback back. So, it wouldn't shock me at all if they finished third in the West. So, but that's my deal. I agree with you with that. I think I know who the top 3 or 4 teams in the league are, but when you're talking about the other 8, I think it's a hodgepodge. I will say, no disrespect to your Commodores, but I do think they're going to be better, but they'll probably, be near the bottom of the league. But I still think they'll have a chance to make a run at a potential bowl game. I do like the young quarterback who, I'll have to admit, you put me on him last year that he was going to be a good player. And I thought he battled against Alabama, taking a knife to a gunfight, and did a pretty nice job. I know he ended up getting injured. But if he's healthy this year, I think Vanderbilt will be better.
Yeah, I see the SEC as Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Florida, Vandy at the bottom. Take the other 9 teams or whatever it is. I would put Tennessee more towards the top. Gun to my head, I would argue A&M more towards the top, although that one could blow up spectacularly for all the reasons
they have talent.
Name. Right. Mississippi State, I just don't know because you're changing offenses, you're changing coaches, you're changing coordinators, you're changing a lot of stuff there. You lost a great corner. Ole Miss transfer heavy. How does that gel or not gel? I just think it's going to be fascinating. But I think we see the tiers about the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. No doubt about that. I mean, I think it's just going to be a league. It's going to be a really good league, but it's going to be a little top heavy. And then the middle will be good, but I don't know if it'll be great. We'll just have to see because they'll kind of cannibalize themselves.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating wherever it settles. But what's fascinating is seeing the interest in basketball in your state. And my goodness, the Alabama roster has been and I don't say this disparaging, it's been a work in process in the offseason. If you haven't kept up, you've missed everything. You got guys going in Jahvon Quinerly this week who at the portal. You got Charles Bediako declaring for the draft and signing, I think, a 1-year deal. You got Mark Sears staying. You got Alabama already having added, 3 really good, highly sought transfers, at least in the portal. What do we make of what Nate Oats is building for next season?
He's still recruiting at a level that I've never seen at Alabama, and I think they're doing remarkably well when you factor in that he lost his entire staff, and I'm talking about on the court coaches. When you're talking about Antoine Petway going to Kennesaw State, longtime aide at Alabama, ace recruiter, Brian Hodgson, who quickly rose up the ranks of the best recruiters in the country, he's now taken over with Jeff Purinton at Arkansas State. And then of course, then Charlie Henry ends up at Georgia Southern. So you lose 3, but he got Austin Clonch from Nicholls State, and he also got Ryan Pannone. And Ryan Pannone has been a revelation. One of my best contacts that close to the staff told me he was Charlie Henry on steroids, and that just meant that he was a big time, defensive guru, but also really good on the offensive side. He's a tactician. He was really well liked within the Pelicans organization, but quite frankly, they have these tiers where you're a frontline assistant, you're on the second line. He was a second line. They weren't going to be able to move him up, and Nate Oats could pay him more money and give him more responsibility. And so Nate Oats' relationship with a lot of NBA people came to pass here, and the president of the Pelicans, I think, basically told Pannone that, hey, I can give you a raise, but I can't give you more responsibility. You can have more at Alabama and maybe come back to us and climb up the ladder. So Pannone went to Alabama, and I think he's been the driving force with him getting Grant Nelson, and that could be the difference between being an NIT level team or maybe sneaking into the NCAA tournament or having a chance to make a run again. Because Grant Nelson was wanted by a lot of schools from North Dakota State. I know Arkansas wanted him. A lot of schools wanted him. He's a stretch 4 and 5. And with, the departures expected from Brandon Miller and Noah Clowney and then Bediako as well, pretty much your entire front court's gone. So you got to have some production there. Getting Grant Nelson's production or getting his ability there officially now is huge. And then it allowed them to get Jaron Stevenson, who has a lot of Noah Clowney in him. But we'll see if he's as advanced as Noah ended up being since he's reclassifying. But right now, you just mentioned Bediako and his 1-year deal with the Spurs. And then with JQ departing, the roster's still not done now. And I think the one thing I'm confident is that Nate Oats understands the climate and understands what they have to do. And they've still got to name their third assistant. I think they're in the process of doing that. I would watch Preston Murphy, former Creighton assistant, to be named to the staff. And they're doing a lot of recruiting still. And I think they still would love to get another rim protector if they could, and then a guard to replace Jahvon Quinerly. And ironically, you and Blake Level do a great job with basketball with Southeastern 14. But we know the Bob Huggins situation, very sad that he ended up having to retire before he wanted to. But I think 2 of their players, Mohamed Wagay, who's a rim protector, and then Joe Toussaint, they both may end up on campus. Now, they might commit somewhere else tonight. But as of now, from what I'm hearing, they're supposed to be on campus in the coming days and visit Alabama. They could take those 2 roster spots potentially if both of them see a fit there. And so it will be very interesting. And I think this Alabama roster has a chance to be very, very good. I love Aaron Estrada, the transfer out of Hofstra. I think he's going to be a good player. Latrell Wrightsell out of Fullerton. I think he's a shooter that's going to help fit into the system. You mentioned Sears being back. He's going to play on the ball more this year. But certainly they lost a lot of production and scoring. But I think a guy to watch to break out is Rylan Griffin, who had his moments a year ago, but I think has first team all SEC type talent. And I think this Alabama team still, and my expectations are going to be, they're going to be in the top half of the SEC and have a chance to, make a run in the NCAA tournament if this roster gels. And I think Nate Oats knows exactly what he's doing. And I'm just happy you mentioned it at the start of the segment, but in my state, and I talked about this on another show this week, that Alabama and Auburn's basketball coaches, and I never in my wildest dreams would have thought this, are among the top 10 paid in college basketball. I would have always thought it'd be football, but basketball is becoming huge in the state of Alabama. And for me, who's a basketball guy at heart, who still was always going to love football, but I love basketball. It's like a kid in a candy store. And certainly where Nate Oats and Bruce Pearl have taken this rivalry is as good as it's ever been since the salad days of Wimp Sanderson and Sonny Smith. And I expect both teams to be really good, and I think Alabama is going to be a top 15 team potentially if they can get these 2 roster spots taken care of.
Yeah, I want to go back to Mark Sears for just a minute. He was a kid that averaged almost 20 points a game before transferring to Alabama. Last year it was Brandon Miller's team. They had a lot of other parts. You mentioned him being on the ball. Could this be a year where, and it can be a point guard's game sometimes, does he have the capability of kind of taking this team over and becoming an SEC Player of the Year caliber guy?
Potentially. I think the athleticism and length and just open court ability of Rylan Griffin, probably he would be the guy that I would put more in the conversation of Player of the Year. But Sears can be an all-SEC level guy. But the thing with him is he's only about 6 feet tall, a little under that. He's not the longest guard there is, but he's tough. He rebounds like a guy that's 6'4", and if they can put the right kind of shooters around him and allow him the ability to the lanes that he needs to get to the rim, that's certainly a possibility for him to be able to finish a little better. One thing that he always has done better than Jahvon Quinerly is he's a really good free throw shooter. Q was good at times, and then at times he would slump a little bit. But Sears can manufacture points without getting buckets by getting to the line. If he drives it a little bit more this year, perhaps he gets to the free throw line even more. But I do think he is an all-SEC caliber player. I think Rylan Griffin is too. And so we'll have to see. Now, there'll have to be somebody, maybe it's a Sam Walters if he gains weight during the offseason. It kind of hurt him when Muhammad Diobate suffered a torn meniscus. He's another freshman from the Connecticut area that was a Herb Jones level guy that could rebound and defend, and was a guy that I think they thought could earn a role that way. He suffered that knee injury, so he'll be out a lot of the offseason. I think he's going to be back at some point, hopefully before practice starts, but we'll see how quickly he heals. But it's going to be interesting to see how he fits the parts together. Grant Nelson is a huge one, literally and figuratively, though, because he has the ability to stretch it out, shoot it from the perimeter. He can take the ball to the rim as a 6'10" guy. So he will definitely help all these guards out. But Alabama still has plenty of depth at guard. But what they need and what made that team so good, of course, Brandon Miller was a special talent, Chris, but they were good defensively. And they were really good around the rim, especially later in the season and winning the SEC tournament. And right now, they don't have that obvious rim protector. Charles Bediako would have given that to them. It's going to be interesting to see if they can solve that riddle, and if Muhammad Wagay or someone else ends up coming into this roster and trying to be the rim protector that they need.
All right, we had a laugh about this off podcast, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you anyway and be a jerk about it, I guess. But we were joking, like, how in the world, there's so many moving parts with rosters these days, some pieces that still need to set in the portal. But do you get an idea of maybe where Alabama might fit in the pecking order in the SEC? I mean, look, there's still got some parts to go, but there's a lot there to make you think that's at least an NCAA tournament team.
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, if the guard play is as good as I think it is, and their depth there, I think they can be, a really good basketball team. Certainly, they're going to need to be able to match up inside with some teams and rebound the ball. And they were a really good rebounding team a year ago because they were long at every position. They had a lot of size. Probably won't have as much positional size this year, so they might have to play a little faster. I know it's like, wow, because Coach Oates always wants to play at such a fast tempo, but they might press a little bit more, might use some pressure defense. But I still think it's an NCAA tournament roster, and especially if they can get a couple more pieces in there, no question about it. I think they like where the shooting is. I think they believe they'll be able to shoot the basketball. And so I think overall it's going to be a fun team to watch. Now, they might not hit their stride till midseason, and they do play a really tough schedule. They got to go to Phoenix and play Arizona. That's not going to be easy. They drew Clemson in the ACC SEC Challenge, but that one will be in Tuscaloosa certainly. So they certainly have some challenges in their out-of-conference schedule, no doubt about it. But they got to play Purdue over in Toronto with Zach Edey back. But we kind of know the style Purdue will play. They'll be a slower team, and so that'll be interesting. I would have loved to have seen Bediako try to guard Edey, but now we won't see that. Now we may see Grant Nelson try to bring him away from the basket. So it brings more intrigue. But I do think that Nate Oats is an elite coach, and I do think that Alabama's a program now that's reached the point under him. This will be year 5 where it's more about reload. And the biggest thing is, do you have a coach who understands the climate of college basketball in this day and time? And I do think you do so with Nate. He understood they had to step up the NIL, and he's been frank. And the one thing I like about covering him is he's so blunt. He's like, look, people and fans got to understand, you're going to have a new team almost every year now, at least 3/4 of your team if you're at the level you want to be. You're going to have guys leave early for the NBA. You're going to have guys transfer. So you're going to have to hit the portal yourself. You're going to have to sign really good players. And so it's not going to be unusual here to see who you're going to play. And then, again, and sometimes it may take a little bit longer for the pieces to fit. I thought last year the key was that overseas trip helped them a lot figure out, what they had. Now, they're not going to be able to do that this year, so that's going to be interesting. So, that their first 3 or 4 games – where they're figuring out rotations and lineups is going to be interesting because they're going to have a younger group and maybe be a different style of basketball team and be more guard oriented than they were a year ago.
Okay, Drew, let's switch to baseball. It was a mind-boggling year in Tuscaloosa with all the stuff that went on with the coaching change, the gambling scandal, the coaching hire, the season that I'm not going to say got rescued from the fire because that was a borderline NCAA tournament team, but one that really took off late and had, in hindsight, and you're seeing this as these kids hit the portal, I always thought Alabama had a lot of talent. I think that bore itself out in terms of what happened in May and June. Made a hire, poached Maryland's coach, but lost a lot of kids in the portal so far, including a key arm and a key power bat, not to mention some graduations and such. Once the dust is settled, what do you make of the year that was and what's ahead?
Well, the first thing I'll say, and I had a good relationship with Brad Bohannon, is I think he was a lieutenant, not a general. I think he was an outstanding recruiter. He put together a team that was good enough to host a regional and nearly get to Omaha. Now, if you're asking me, would they have done that if he coached the team throughout the duration of the season? I say no. I think it was a blessing in disguise. Now, horrible that Alabama had to go through the scandal, but the way the team responded and came through the other side, it was twofold. I think it helped the guys relax. It helped J.J. Jackson grow in and come into his own. It certainly enhanced his career. And it allowed those guys to finally play the kind of baseball they're capable of playing. And I thought they looked like a true baseball team, from the Vandy series on. They just had a different look to them, a different tenor. I thought J.J. did a great job of organizing everything. Hunter Morris and Matt Reed did a great job with the hitters, and they were older, but they finally started putting it together. It always seemed like, Chris, and you watched them, that they couldn't get over the hump. Well, it was very cathartic when they won that 2-1 game on a Saturday against Vanderbilt to win that series, because Vanderbilt's very talented. We saw them win the SEC tournament in Hoover. I thought they were going to go to Omaha, but we see how goofy the NCAA playoffs are. The baseball playoffs are the most unpredictable.
Yeah,
They're more
they really
unpredictable than basketball. They're certainly more unpredictable than football. But sometimes teams peak too early. But I thought this Alabama team peaked at just the right time. Now, they were underseeded and got a bad draw and had to play one of the three best teams in America: Wake Forest, LSU, Florida. That's the three best. I think we all understand that. They had to go to Wake Forest, and they took it on the chin. But I think they maxed out, and now they've gone to get Rob Vaughn, who from Maryland, who did a great job there in a Big Ten and a tough place to win. Now we'll see if he can do it in the SEC. But he's 35 years old and already been a head coach for 6 years, which is encouraging. I thought it was extremely encouraging that they kept J.J. Jackson, who, everybody always asks me, is he going to be the head coach? And I said, well, the only way that'll happen is if they probably get to Omaha. And if not, I don't think he will. But when I covered him, and I had a chance to really cover this team a lot when in the postseason run, the vibe you got from him in the post game and then around the players was that his A1 goal was to, of course, get this team as far as he could. But it didn't seem to me that his end game was the head coaching job. Certainly he would have wanted it. But he even admitted, I've been at this a long time. He was at Florida Atlantic 9 years as pitching coach. He was at Alabama 6. He turned down a chance to go to Florida State as pitching coach. Certainly he would have been wanted as a pitching coach at other places after making the run at Alabama this year, even as maybe a head coach at a smaller program. But I think he liked being at Alabama, and I thought Greg Byrne approached it perfectly. He targeted Vaughn early, and they started talking, and you heard Vaughn in his press conference. He was watching the team closely. And then I think Vaughn realized, okay, he didn't have any ties to the East Coast when he went from Kansas State to Maryland and did well. But he's like, I need somebody that knows this team that can recruit in the SEC. And so they were able to convince JJ to stay. But you just brought it up. When there is a coaching change, and we've learned this now, no matter what, that there are going to be guys going into the portal. And they've lost a couple of big ones. You mentioned Colby Shelton. He's already gone to Florida. Luke Holman is still in the portal. I think if Alabama were to get him back, which I doubt, but if they were, it would be one of the biggest coups ever to get him back. But it doesn't sound that way just because of the climate in it right now. But they look like they're going to get Ben Hess back. He's not going to have arm surgery. They could get Antoine John back, who missed the year with Tommy John, who's in the Cape right now, throwing well. And then they got guys like Aiden Moza and their closer, and Alton Davis. He didn't have a good outing against Wake, but he only really had one bad one, and that was, of course, against Florida in the SEC tournament after about March 11th. So he's got electric stuff. He's coming back. So there's a lot of bones in the pitching staff that you can build around, but they're going to have to rebuild the lineup. But they've got Evan Slight from Rutgers, the power hitting outfielder. They've brought one, Ian Petrutz from Maryland, and I think they're going to bring more. And then it's all about two. What about, can they talk a guy like Dominic Tomez into coming back, Jim Jarvis? And some of that may be after the draft, because a lot of this is going to be they signed some really good JUCOs. Because Brad Bohannon, the problem wasn't recruiting. The problem was coaching and focus. And so they've got some good players that I think they're going to be able to try to retain. And so a lot of the dust won't settle until after the draft. And so that's going to be where the final pieces are put together. And then, of course, his coaching staff. He got his lead assistant from Maryland to come over, Anthony Papio. But we don't know yet what's going to happen with Matt Rita and Hunter Morris, the two hitting coaches. I have not been able to ascertain if they're going to be retained, if they're going to stay or not. Because I think, and you are much more up on the rules of college baseball than me, but I think they can add one more full-time assistant this year. I think so. Yeah. So that means technically that he could bring in one more full-timer. So we'll see what he does there and what kind of recruiting ties they have. But I will say this, and I'm pretty confident in it. Of the big three, and I always consider the big three football, baseball, and basketball. And probably in the order would be football because it's the most money, then basketball, and then baseball. There is more players in baseball than any of the sports. Yeah. And just because, and I've got a Braves hat on, you've got a Braves shirt on, just because you're the Mets and you spend $300 million does not mean you're going to have a good team. Now LSU, everything worked out for them this year. Got one of the best teams in college baseball history, but that's not always going to happen. And so you can win. And what I want to see out of the University of Alabama, I was very encouraged by Rob Vaughn's salary, $900,000. They doubled it basically from what he was making at Maryland. They upped J.J. Jackson to $300,000. So, but are you going to give the proper money to the rest of the staff? Are you going to fully fund the support staff around those guys? And are you going to get in the NIL game? Now, are they going to get into it as high as Tennessee or LSU or Texas? I doubt it. But are you going to play ball? Because if you are, you can compete. And that's what you're going to have to do. I've got to believe they will. Or look, Rob Vaughn, as tough as the SEC is, and the jobs are all very attractive, but if you don't think the school you're going to in said conference is committed, you're not going to go because you're going to take a knife to a gunfight and get annihilated. Because he already had the best program in the Big Ten. And so, again, I want to see if Alabama's finally going to commit. They should have committed to Jim Wells years ago. I'm still bitter about it on this show. It should be Sewell Thomas Stadium at Jim Wells Field. It's not. He was staring LSU straight in the eye, and they didn't give him what he needed. They made him promises that they didn't keep. But now is Greg Byrne going to keep him to Rob Vaughn? We'll see. But the next few weeks are going to be very interesting with the draft coming up and with the transfer portal.
Yeah, the resource challenge to me there, Drew, is interesting. I'm not in and on the portal are important, right? But I think sometimes you see schools that just throw money at kids who are in the portal, maybe because they're looking out for number one. And I don't blame a kid for doing that, but sometimes that's got some repercussions on chemistry. You do see some elite programs that aren't just out there throwing money at every kid in the portal. They might be hey, you come and mind your P's and Q's, and then we can talk about that. So I don't know that that's something that can't be overcome, but it does seem like Alabama did get hammered a little bit in the portal with kids that could get big paydays, perhaps, in terms of a couple guys leaving. You've got the lottery thing. You've got, look, you've got a lot of mouths to feed over there between Nick Saban and what Nate Oats has done with basketball. To me, the resource challenge with all those things and how they handle it and what Alabama is or isn't able to do. Because, look, I think people forget it. Like, had 2020 gone down, or had Connor Prelip stayed healthy, you could play the what if game with Alabama a lot of different ways the last 3 or 4 years, and it probably would have gone better than it did. They weren't bad as it was, but my point is Alabama had all those challenges to begin with, right? And you still saw an outstanding team this year, or at least an excellent one, depending on where your bar for outstanding is. And you saw some other teams the past couple of years that either made the tournament or could have made the tournament, or who knows what in 2020. I just think it's an interesting discussion because Alabama has had a lot going against it in baseball, and yet has done some nice things the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, here's my point. It's just like when Avery Johnson's ship ran aground in basketball. Auburn had hired Bruce Pearl. It was obvious they got a shot of adrenaline, and they were starting to do things you had never seen Auburn basketball do. And so then they make the Final Four. So Alabama has to do something, okay? Or you're going to get passed and potentially buried if you don't do something major. So they went and got Nate Oats, and it changed the trajectory of Alabama basketball. And Alabama hasn't made the Final Four, but they've made 2 Sweet 16s, won 2 SEC tournaments, which they had not done since 91, and 2 conference championships, which they hadn't done since 02. And they're recruiting at a level we've never seen. So they proved if they hired the right coach, and now they've committed to him financially, that they could win at a very high level. In baseball, yes, you're right. The lottery is an issue, and it certainly is. But here's something else that's happened that may have changed the way of thinking of the Alabama administration and Greg Byrne and everyone else. 2 of the last 4 years, Auburn has been to Omaha. They have the same kind of situation in the lottery. They're in the same state, but they have fully funded their program. They have exhausted every avenue to give their players what they need, stipend-wise, what they need facility-wise. They're starting to upgrade those 30 or 40 million, whatever they can do, I guess, to sweeten the pot and to take care of their players, and with whether it's medical care, food, support staff, they have maxed it out. Because when Butch Thompson got there, he was making, like Brad Bohannon, $400,000 or $500,000, but they realized quickly that they finally got it right for the first time since Hal Baird retired. And they quickly doubled his salary. He's one of the 9 making over $1 million. His staff is fully funded, and they're giving him every opportunity to win. And then the other 2 things that happened was Mississippi State and Ole Miss won national championships. And so, and they're in some of the same boats that Alabama's in as well. And then you see what Scott Berry, now retired, has done at Southern Mississippi. You can win if you fully fund your program. The lottery is an obstacle, but it's one that you can work around. But you have to hire the right coach. And then when you hire the right coach, and maybe they have with Rob Vaughn finally, for the first time since Jim Wells retired, you give him what he needs. You give him every avenue to win, and you can still overcome that. And, I still think that's possible. And I still think it's possible for Alabama to get to Omaha. They were 2 wins away this year. I mean, and you look at what Wake Forest has done. They don't have a great history, so to speak. But Tom Walter, now it took a long time, but if you're patient and you give the guy what he needs, you can win at the highest level. And I think you can do that, certainly. And I think Alabama can if Rob Vaughn's the guy. And I'm certainly excited. I think Nate Oats, when I studied him and I started peeling back the onion, because I knew about him in Buffalo, but I didn't know a lot about his background. But when I found out about it, found out what he'd done at Romulus in Detroit, found out what people said about him in coaching circles, he was just a ball coach, man. He's a grinder. And I think Rob Vaughn is the same way. I haven't studied him as much as I have Oats, but, I mean, a lot about the background of college baseball. But I've started to kind of dig around, and everything I've seen is very encouraging. And I know how hard it is to win at Maryland, and what he did, I think, was pretty remarkable the last 2 or 3 years. And I think with Alabama's resources, and I think that's probably what went through his mind, if Greg Byrne, who I think is a very supportive athletic director, he's had to make some difficult decisions. But I think another thing that I'm confident in is Greg Byrne came from a school in Arizona where baseball means a lot. And they had great facilities there. They competed for championships. He hired Jay Johnson, who's now on top of the college baseball mountain. And so while Brad Bohannon didn't work out, he did fix the program. And one thing Coach Bohannon did is, when he took over 6 years ago, it was as low as I've ever seen it. It's not nearly that low now. And now with the transfer portal, it's difficult because you can lose guys, but the portal can giveth, and just like it can taketh. And so I think Alabama's going to get some good players. They might have a little bit of a rough first year. We'll see, but I don't know that yet. I want to wait and see when the dust settles, because we all know this, and this is what I've learned in baseball, especially with as good as the SEC, because I was in school at Alabama, Chris, in the 90s, and Vanderbilt was a non-factor. Ole Miss was terrible. Now the entire league is a Shark Tank. And so what it's turned into is, hey, man, keep your head above water. Keep your guys healthy, hopefully. And if you can get to Hoover with even close to a 500 record in the SEC, and then get into a regional and get hot,
have a shot.
You got a shot to get to Omaha, because there ain't nothing like the SEC. None of these conferences are even close. And so that's the key. You just gotta keep grinding. And Tim Corbin certainly did it. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think Vandy would turn into what they've turned into, which is, I still think, one of the top 3 or 4 programs in the country. And they've won 2 national championships. And Vanderbilt has totally, funded their program. And just like Tennessee has too. 6 years ago, Tennessee was a laughing stock.
Yep.
And now they're a major power. So it can be done. You just have to know how to get it done. Vandy figured it out. Tennessee's figured it out. Now hopefully Alabama will.
Well, Drew, you get it done every day on the airwaves down there in Huntsville. I suspect if folks are listening, they know how to find you already, but if not, let them know.
Absolutely, and appreciate you having me on Southeastern 14 today, Chris. But they can connect with me at Drew D977 ESPN on Twitter, with our station 977 ESPN, and with our streaming channel at the Blitz Sports, all on Twitter. And they can go to our SoundCloud page, 977 The Zone. We post all our content there, at 977ESPN.com as well. 977thezone.com. And we love interacting with everyone. My show is 7 to 9 a.m. Talking ball from Monday through Friday, and then from 9 to 10 a.m. on the Blitz Sports Radio streaming channel. We talk recruiting, sports, a lot of different things. I know you've joined us on both many times, but I'm on from 7 to 10 every Monday through Friday, and always enjoy it. And I appreciate the time to talk a little Alabama athletics with you today.
Yeah, been a lot of fun. You were one of the sharpest, most knowledgeable guys, most versatile guys in the business. Always fun to have you on. So we'll make it happen again soon. We're doing this in the last week of June, in case people want to. In case people hear something doesn't make sense, because the portal things change constantly. But just to timestamp it. To timestamp it for our audience. That's when we'll do it. But Drew, we'll have you on. I will see you in our hometown of Nashville here in a couple of weeks.
Hey, I envy you and Blake, man. You get to sleep in your own bed.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank God for that. But look forward to hanging out with you there. Be safe. And, again, thank you for joining us today.
No problem. Appreciate it.